I would love to see the long range transportation project list being, you know, kind of our first reference point if we're looking at prioritizing something for our CIP list or something like that. I think any kind of project prioritization, this should just be a ready reference, and I think probably that aligns with you know, the administration's desire now too. I think that is, but you know, certainly from a council standpoint, having a really good, objectively scored, concise project list. I think our project list before was probably too big, and probably because it was so big, it was less useful.
Thanks, Jordan. Mirta?
I echo what Jordan has said. I think that having the LRTP be our overarching umbrella document that we can easily reference to, I can see it being super useful for reviewing big subdivisions, see how that, you know, the development aspect of growth, how that ties into our transportation priorities. So yeah, I think that we need to start using it more as an overarching tool for city councilors to make decisions based on both transportation and land use.
Thank you. Yeah, that's an excellent point. From the county's vantage point, I think the long-range transportation plan, at least from the work that the commissioners do, I think has been an underutilized tool, and anything that this document could do to be user-friendly enough to incorporate into our decision-making, land use or otherwise, would be fantastic. Other questions or comments from folks? Debbie.
Yeah, I wondered, I realize that I don't want this list to go out like 18 more columns to the right, but I wondered about the possibility of incorporating benefits onto this list with maybe just a star or something like that. Like land use has been mentioned, you know, volume reduction has been mentioned, you know, from my aspect where my voice on this, you know, maybe there's an air quality aspect of a project that can just whatever those potential improvements are that the project addresses, it might help us to make decisions in the future about what to, you know, what to fund when.
Thank you. Good comments. Additional folks? And Jennifer, if you have any feedback at any point, feel free to jump in.
Great. Well, these comments are really helpful and tie to the last piece of what Aaron and I wanted to share today, which is some early thinking about some revised goals for the long range plan. I think what you all have mentioned in terms of having an objectively prioritized list that really becomes the go-to document and that reflects the benefits that different projects provide is very much in line with what we've been starting to think about. And so I'm really glad to hear you share that and know that we are on the right track in how we start to think about this. I do think that, you know, one of the things we've heard from some of the other conversations we've had is the importance of having a clearly prioritized list, but also something that gives you all the opportunity to be opportunistic when grants arise, when partnership opportunities arise. And so I think that's a place where having the benefits articulated and having that kind of breadth of projects can come in really handy. So we'll make sure that we maintain some of those pieces as well. So just to put one other thing in front of you for consideration today, we have started to think a little bit about the ways that we tie some of the early values conversations that we've had with you and that we've started to have with members of the public into the goals and the decision-making framework for the project. As we've talked about before, one of the reasons that we really feel it's important to start with values is that if you can get agreement on what matters most to a community and what matters most to people, it's a little easier to develop a prioritization process and a decision-making process that actually sticks, so that you have the confidence as you have ranked projects, as you've prioritized them, that they are really advancing you toward your goals. And so to do that, we've started to translate some of the values activities into a set of 5 draft goals. Rather than moving right to thinking about targets, like to the specific numbers that we want to try and achieve, we've started by focusing at our desired outcomes level. So what are the things that we hope these goals will translate into? And again, all of this is to ensure that if we get the early stages right, by the time we set the really measurable targets, we'll have a lot more confidence that the sets of projects and programs that we've identified are going to get us there. So here's just one example of how that plays out. If we say that some of the values that are really important to Missoula are safety and equity and health, which are things that we have heard so far in this planning process, you can translate those values into a goal that focuses on improving safety and promoting health to enhance the region's quality of life. And then when we think about what that actually means, what are the outcomes that we would hope to see by advancing that goal? Well, we might hope to see an elimination of traffic-related fatalities. We might also hope to see an increase in physical activity. There are lots of ways that you can achieve those outcomes in terms of the mix of projects, the mix of programs, but it starts to be a way to really explain what we mean. So we have, as I mentioned, created 5 draft goals. These build from the 8 goals that were in the last long-range plan and are consistent with the federal requirements in terms of the types of goals, the types of performance measures that will matter. I won't go through all of these in great detail today because there will be more time for TPCC to weigh in on these. But some of what we have tried to reflect, you see in the values wheel to the right. And so the first goal really focuses on safety and promoting health. The second focuses on sustainability and climate resilience, which is far and away the #1 value that people have shared with us. The third goal is around expanding mobility choices. And so this really gets to options for people, and then also focuses on accessibility and how well the system works. The fourth goal focuses on connections and really strengthening communities and advancing equity. And then the fifth focuses on maintaining what you've got, maintaining your assets, and really thinking about how you make strategic investments. So those are the draft goals that we've got. I'm happy to take any comments or questions on those, but certainly you will have more time to review them as well.
Thanks, Jennifer. I think that's a solid foundation. I like those goals a lot. Other folks, thoughts on these particular updated goals? Jordan.
Thanks. So I guess a question would be, would these like supersede all of the previous goals, or would they be kind of in addition to those goals?
These would replace the 8 previous goals, and we've done a bit of a crosswalk to make sure that we didn't lose anything from the previous 8. But yeah, the idea would be that we are putting forward this new set.
Great. That's kind of what I was hoping. I was 5 is much more manageable than 13, so I wanted to make sure I was understanding that correctly. I think I agree with Dave. I think these are really great draft goals.
Great. And it looks like we have Peter. Peter, when we did roll call, I'm not sure if you were on the line at that point, but we do have Peter Benson with us now.
Yeah, sorry I'm late, guys. I got my times wrong. My question is kind of a little bit out of the box. Do we pay attention as a group to the airport and transportation to the airport and back? But also, one of my concerns is becomes greater as with the growth in the Mullen Road area increases about noise pollution. You know, are we going to get into the situation so many small towns have gotten into where all of a sudden we get a lot of complaints about airplane noise. Do we ever think about the transportation aspect of the airport?
Good question, Peter. Aaron or Jennifer, would you like to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a point well taken, and it further just compounds that relationship between land use and transportation. From the transportation plan side, I think we can talk about air travel and how it relates to our other the other work that we're doing in transportation. I guess the one caveat is that the airport is regulated under sort of separate guidelines and is not as fully part of the long range transportation plan as maybe some other modes are. So the Federal Aviation Administration regulates air travel in a way that the long range transportation plan doesn't. And so I think there's a partnership there, and they are certainly very related and intertwined, and we should be thinking about that. But we don't necessarily have any regulatory control over a lot of that with the long range transportation plan, if that makes sense.
But I think point well taken from you, Peter, in terms of it's one thing if you have, say, kind of a legacy neighborhood through which a transportation project is constructed and then are needing to provide mitigations by way of sound walls and such. It's a very different thing if we're building a new neighborhood and folks may be unaware of the impacts from noise, et cetera, by an existing transportation system like the airport.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think when we're talking about that land use transportation relationship, we shouldn't forget it's not just about cars, walking, biking. It's also rail and air travel, and those have a relationship with our development pattern and our land use. So I think that's a good point well taken. When we're talking about that connection, we need to make sure we're talking about all of our transportation systems.
Thanks.
Other questions or comments from the committee? Okay. Next steps.
That's right. I'll just wrap us up for today. So we are, in addition to developing the call for projects, we are also developing a couple of videos that will be available, we're hoping as early as next week. And one gives a quick overview of the MPO and what its role is in transportation planning. And then the other gives an overview of the long range transportation plan and invites people to participate and share their ideas. So those are the first two in a series of videos. And again, we hope they'll be available next week. The goal is to be able to launch the call for projects either at the end of this week or maybe the beginning of next, right after the holiday, and then move into a couple of targeted workshops with the committees that I mentioned. Certainly we'll come back to you with the draft goals and some thinking about performance measures to get a little bit more feedback there. And then we'll move into using that refined set of goals and performance measures to develop the evaluation framework. And that's the tool that we'll use when we have this very large set of projects to begin prioritizing them and putting them in order of the way that we may move forward with seeking funding and implementing them. So that is what is coming next.
Great, that's good stuff. Thanks, Jennifer. Any other comments on the long range transportation plan from folks on the call here? Jordan.
One of the things that I'm worried about with our current environment is that we're going to lose. I mean, I think we're engaging in a lot of great ways, but I think we're losing people. This whole telecommuting environment has exposed a lot of equity issues, and I think, we talked at the outset of this plan about wanting to make sure that we reach people who are traditionally challenging populations to reach anyway. And so I just wanted to highlight that again and kind of throughout the process that I think that's really important, and would love any ideas that you might have on how we go about kind of reaching more marginalized and difficult to reach populations.
Great. Thank you for raising that, Jordan. It's an important reminder that there is more to engagement in these times than just digital engagement, and that we do have to work doubly hard to reach the folks that we don't typically engage with very well, to be honest. So we're doing a couple of things. One of those is working through our Citizens Advisory Committee and the populations that they serve, the networks that they serve, to try and better connect with folks in different ways and encourage participation from people who might not be likely to participate. So that's one key thing we're doing. The second is starting to engage with a broader set of groups, including the, is it STAC, Aaron? STAC, is that right?
Yeah, the Special Transportation Advisory Committee, which is sort of our accessibility committee that has representation from Aging Services, Mountain Line, Summit Independent Living, sort of a whole host of folks. That will be a key committee that we'll reach out to over the next couple of months or throughout the process, really. But we meet with them monthly, so.
Yeah, so we're starting that engagement on Friday of this week. And then I've kind of alluded to a few other analog tools that provide opportunities for people to connect. And so one of the simple things we're thinking about is a postcard that can be mailed and can invite people to participate in different ways. We've also been talking about like a card game or something else that could be sent to people and provide an opportunity for them to participate and to connect. So trying to get creative and thinking about what we can do beyond all of the digital tools, but a lot of that starts with just direct connections to our advisory committees and to service providers.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate that.
Thanks, Jennifer. Anything else from folks on the long range transportation plan? Well, Jennifer, thanks for making the trek all the way from Seattle.
Absolutely, anytime. It's great to see you all again.
And we look forward to remaining engaged and hearing from you at a future meeting.
Sounds great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, our next item is a presentation of Missoula in Motion's annual report and an update on transportation option activities. Catherine, are you out there?
Hi, yes, I'm here. Catherine Auger with Missoula in Motion. Let me get my screen pulled up. And yeah, Aaron just asked me to come give an update kind of on what we're working on and what some of our accomplishments from the past year. I'm going to just stop my video. I'm having some internet problems and it seems to work better if I don't run my video. So, all right. Okay. So most of you are familiar with Missoula in Motion and what we do. We are dedicated to increasing the use of sustainable transportation here in Missoula, and we do that through education and encouragement programming efforts. So we really address this question of, if you build it, will they come? So we know that while building infrastructure is certainly crucial, it's really not enough. It needs to be done concurrently with efforts to educate and encourage people to actually use that infrastructure. So a quote that speaks to this that I really like comes from Portland's Active Transportation Initiative. And that says, as a region, we have learned that building complete streets, bikeways, and walkways is not enough. Sure, some people will use the infrastructure. If you build it, they will come. But if you build it and you encourage people to use it in ways that are meaningful to their daily lives, then they will come in droves, flocks, and stampedes. A local example of this perspective is really seen in our downtown area. So we know we have really great sustainable transportation infrastructure already in place within our downtown. But still, we know that the majority of people do rely on their vehicles and driving alone for the majority of their trips. So the solution here is not necessarily to improve infrastructure or to add more infrastructure, but really to start changing people's attitudes. And the work that we do really supports many of the goals adopted in our community planning documents. So of course, this group is probably most familiar with the mode split goals that were adopted in the previous update to the LRTP that call for reducing the drive alone rate about 50%. So we know that achieving these goals really takes more than just increasing bus service or adding bike lanes. It really requires changing how people think about how they get around and focusing on that as well. And then, of course, the work that we do really closely aligns with our climate action goals. We know that the transportation sector has been identified as the #1 contributor of emissions. So reducing those vehicle miles traveled certainly supports those objectives. And then I also wanted to include the downtown master plan, which was recently updated this past year. And it really prioritized multimodal options and getting people to think differently about how they access our downtown area. An important component of what we do of each of our programs is really evaluating our impact and using that to inform how we structure our programs moving forward. So more recently, leaders in the transportation options field have started to look to what we know from the social sciences about what makes a person change their behavior, and then have started incorporating these findings into our programs. So with that knowledge, we've really shifted away from a one-size-fits-all approach to marketing and outreach. And instead, we rely on a more nuanced understanding of the complex process that a person actually goes through when they're breaking an old habit and forming a new one. So the stages of change continuum, which is illustrated here, provides professionals with a framework by which we can evaluate an individual's readiness to make a behavior change, and then develop different strategies that are tailored to individuals in each of these 5 stages. So we see that the most effective programs of today really emphasize staff time that's spent working one-on-one with constituents, and define success not just by the number of people that choose sustainable options in total, but rather by the number of individuals that move from one stage to the next on this continuum. So with that, we always emphasize that we're not expecting or trying to shift all drivers out of their vehicles for all of their trips, but we're really just trying to meet people where they're at and help them along to the next stage within this model. And we always emphasize that it's really not all or nothing. It's about doing what you can when you can. And even if that just means leaving your vehicle at home for 1 trip per week, we know that collectively these minor shifts would really have a tremendous impact. So taking into consideration this new advanced understanding of behavior change has really helped frame some of our programs, and certainly helped inform the strategic planning process that we went through in 2018, which set our priorities, our different work plan priorities. So I'll go over those briefly. The first one is our Way to Go Missoula. And that refers to our online platform that really supports all of the different programs that we run. And then also refers to the individual encouragement that we provide and the resources we provide to individuals to support them in choosing sustainable transportation options. So some highlights within this program is our Guaranteed Ride Home initiative, which offers up to 12 free rides home per year for those unexpected circumstances that come up for sustainable commuters. Our Way to Go Missoula Trip Planner makes it really easy to discover all of your transportation options and includes things like a carpool matching tool online to find others to rideshare with, and also bike routes by level of comfort. Our second strategic priority is working with employers, which is a big focus within the work that we do. We know that normalizing sustainable commuting within a workplace culture has proven to have a really strong influence on the decisions employees make about how they get to work. So we offer a number of different programs, and we often customize services to the unique needs of each organization we work with. Probably our most notable program is our community-wide commuter challenge, which typically takes place the first 2 weeks of May. However, we did postpone it this year with everything going on. In 2019, we had over 100 workplaces participate. And for this program, rather than just structuring it to reward the people that already use sustainable modes, we have the goal of the challenge is to get every single person at an organization to try sustainable commuting just one time over the 2-week period. So with that framework, we really see that the program achieves significant mode shift, and surveys indicate lasting behavior change. So some of the quotes really speak to that, kind of that this program was the nudge that it took for people to start thinking differently about how they get around and to finally take the leap and try commuting by a different mode. We also do a commuter challenge on the UM campus as well. Then another program is our workplace improvements, where we offer financial assistance for organizations that want to add facilities that support sustainable transportation. So things like carpool parking signage, lockers for active commuters, covered bike parking, and things like that. And then finally, we offer workplace assessments, which is kind of our free consulting services. We work one-on-one with an employer. We collect a lot of data and information. We do employee surveys to learn how employees are currently getting around and what barriers they might be facing to using sustainable transportation options. We look at their facilities and policies, and then we come up with a recommended plan of action and continue to work with those organizations to meet the goals that we set for them. And so another thing to note is that the Commuter Challenge is a program that we do that touches a lot of different organizations. So it's really an opportunity for us to build relationships and kind of get our foot in the door and have a strong contact within a really wide range of different employers in town. And then from there, we're able to build off of that throughout the course of the year and provide different services, encourage them to participate in our programs, and work with them in different capacities. And our third strategic priority is neighborhood outreach. This is a program that we started last year, and it really reflects our commitment to working one-on-one with individuals and that goal of helping move them along the stages of change. So this program, as I said, piloted last spring and summer. We focused on an area within the West Side neighborhood that had really great sustainable transportation options available to residents already. Kind of the Mountain Lines Route 2 serves that area, and it's very walkable to several destinations. And so it entailed going door to door, so physically meeting people where they're at, providing them with personalized trip planning, and also free transportation resources. It was a really successful program. We certainly learned a lot, have a lot of ideas of how to improve the program moving forward. This year, we were hoping to do a second neighborhood focus within the Franklin to the Fort. However, with COVID, we've decided not to do the door-to-door interactions. It doesn't quite seem appropriate. So instead, we're going to be focusing on doing individual outreach with people who are new to Missoula or who have recently moved to a new residence, knowing that times of transition are really opportune times to influence travel behaviors. So we'll be doing that mostly through mailings, but we're hoping to have kind of this similar model, just not doing it in an actual neighborhood. And then our fourth strategic priority are events. So we know that benefits of events include shifting culture, behavior change, celebrating successes, and highlighting infrastructure. So we'll certainly continue to engage in event-based education and outreach. However, we also know that events can sometimes have a tendency to just reward those who are already committed to sustainable transportation. And therefore, we've decided to deprioritize events, and we've discontinued those that are difficult to link to behavior change, which has allowed us to then shift our funding and resources to activities that are shown to increase movement along those stages of change more evidently. So the events that we will continue into the future are our Open Streets program. So in the past couple of years, we've really helped link Sunday Streets, made a stronger link between our Sunday Streets events and sustainable transportation, making that really clear with our messaging. And last year, we also added a second Open Streets event in the Franklin to the Fort neighborhood. We linked two neighborhood parks with a greenway that we closed to cars and encouraged people to walk and bike between those two parks. So kind of highlighting an easy way to visit different destinations using active transportation within a neighborhood. And so that was really successful.
Catherine, can you describe an event that you determined was not maybe achieving the results that you would like and that you ended up dropping?
Sure, yeah. Some of our commuter breakfasts where we kind of set up on the trails and offer free breakfasts, we've done fewer and fewer of those sorts of things. Ironically, another one is our Bike Month program, which is a kind of a celebration of people biking and walking, and it's typically during May, which is our busy time, so we don't have a lot of time to dedicate to it, and it tended to just kind of reward people that were already really committed to biking and walking. However, I'm going to speak in the next slide about why we are doing that this year, just with everything going on. But that was another example.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and also just attending different other community events where we just set up a table is something we don't really find to be really effective. So we've shifted away from that as well. We also offer a number of different services to support large community events and try to curb parking demand at those events within town. So one of those services is our bike valet program. So we have mobile bike valet or mobile bike racks that we can set up to accommodate increased demand at these events. It encourages people to bike by providing a separate amenity. And it's, as you can see in this picture, there's a pretty large need for it at a lot of our large community events. And these racks are also available for any organization to check out for community events. So they've gotten a lot of use in the last couple of years. Not this year though. So that's kind of an overview of what we do typically. Of course, we've had to alter a lot of our services just given our current situation. So one thing that we've really provided kind of bulked up our resources for is teleworking. We've been reaching out to different employers to provide support for this unexpected shift to working from home full time. We've done a couple of webinars that were really well attended to provide folks with resources and added additional resources to our website as well. And then Bike Month, which I mentioned in the last slide, is something we hadn't planned on doing this year, but we saw this time as really opportune to promote biking and to get people out on their bikes, even if it's not really related to commuting. With the low traffic volumes, it's a great time to encourage people to just try biking to different destinations and start to feel comfortable biking on the road. So that is something we have created a lot of different incentives and ways to encourage people to get out on their bikes for a solo ride and then engage with them virtually. And then lastly, we've helped worked with the MPO and Parks and Rec to promote our Greenway network, which I won't really speak about because I think Ben and Aaron will be talking about next. And then I also just kind of wanted to touch on something that we're hoping to work more on moving forward. But we'd really like to see a shift locally towards adopting policies and regulations that support transportation options. We know that that having those in place and formalizing those policies will really be essential to achieving our community goals. We know our community is growing at a very rapid rate. So it's really critical that we address how we regulate development and look at it through a much broader lens. So not just focusing on parking and trying to accommodate the demand for parking that developments require, but instead taking a more comprehensive approach and factoring in, how we look at how people, managing that demand and how people can access different places without necessarily even needing a vehicle. And then just to kind of highlight that when we talk about broadening that conversation, oftentimes thinking about managing transportation demand doesn't always include the different strategies that one would think of and associate with transportation. So this example kind of highlights just the wide range of things that come into play. So things like, having on-site affordable housing would really affect transportation and trips generated, but is much more of a land use policy. And then things like having on-site childcare can really be impactful with transportation, but isn't something that you would really directly associate, often associate with transportation demand. So trying to look to what other cities are doing and seeing if Missoula can kind of start to incorporate some of those into our conversations. And lastly, I just wanted to end with a sample from our Commuters of Missoula series. We tend to focus a lot of our time and energy collecting data and looking kind of at the quantitative impact of our programs and looking at mode shift and things like that. But we found that it's really also valuable to hear some individual perspectives about how people are using our sustainable transportation network and how how choosing sustainable transportation options is affecting their day-to-day lives. So that's, we feature different Missoulians, try to get a wide range of people and share their different stories about using sustainable transportation. And with that, I can take any questions.
Thanks, Catherine. Any questions or comments from the committee? Perhaps you covered all the bases, Catherine.
Hey, Dave, I just have a quick comment too that I'd like to add on to Catherine's presentation.
Sure.
I just want to point out that, you know, seeing this kind of presentation really hits home how much Missoula in Motion focuses on, you know, starting with good research and best practices, structuring programs that we know will be effective in that way, doing really good measurements and being responsive and adapting over time. And I think that if more of our investments and and the work that we do around transportation had that same level of like, we're making sure we're always evaluating how successful projects are, reconfiguring programs if necessary, and really being responsive in that way, I think would go a long way towards achieving our goals. And so I just want to, you know, from the transportation standpoint and staff side, really commend Missoula in Motion for having that kind of program that's really, you know, I think a model for how we should structure a lot of our programs in terms of being just based on good information and good best practices and being responsive. So I think kudos to staff for taking advantage of that and taking these programs in that direction.
Thanks, Aaron. So I've got Jordan, Peter, and then Josh. Jordan?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I think over the years, a couple of my council colleagues have levied undue and unfounded criticisms at Missoula in Motion. And I think it's really important to highlight how adaptive Missoula in Motion has been to changing best practices. I think this work with individualized marketing and outreach and behavior change efforts are it's really kind of the state of best practice and important work that they're doing. And I think one of the things that gets lost in this conversation that we need to continue to highlight is that transportation infrastructure is so expensive, and getting someone who was driving and parking to stop driving and parking is the functional equivalent of building a new parking space. And when we talk about stacking concrete on top of concrete to build structured parking in our downtown or in our community, it only takes a couple of commuters to really start to pay for those services. So the marginal cost of adding each new commuter in each mode is so much higher when it comes to a driving commuter that I think we really have to look at, you know, Missoula in Motion pays for itself over and over again in the amount of infrastructure that we're not building as a result of these programs. So appreciate the update. It's more just a comment that, you know, that is a completely uninformed criticism that comes from a couple members of the city council, and it's completely unwarranted. And I wanted to just take a moment to dispel that.
Thanks, Jordan. And while there might be a couple members of the city's governing body right now, I think there were a different couple of members articulating the same concerns a decade or so back when I was on the council. So excellent points. Peter?
I think that I love the example that you have up, where she says, I'm not an Uber commuter woman, but I needed that little incentive. I think most of us go to work, go to school, take care of kids, etc. and she needs some little incentive to keep her going. She's gone from the meditating or thinking about it in your behavioral modification plan to actual action. She's actually tried it, and she's thought out all of the different steps that are going to get in the way with this behavior change in her life. You know, who's going to pick up the kids if they're sick? Where do I put the groceries on the bike? And she's actually tried it. But one of the things I know with the kids that I work with is that it's that step between action and maintenance that's so difficult. How do we motivate people to keep doing it? You know, all right, I've done it once, I've done it twice. You know, how do I make that into a habit that I can keep up, that's self-sustaining? And I love that you're doing this, and I'm really glad that you've been thinking about the different steps in helping people make this change. But I guess I would urge folks to pay attention to that last step and how we go from action to maintenance.
Yeah, and I can comment on that just with a couple of things that we've tried to do is we partner with different local businesses to get sponsorships every month. So if you log even just a few trips every month, so again, it's not all or nothing, but if some people can just do it once a week, wanting them to sustain that habit, and they get, like a $5 gift card. So those are donated from different businesses. And then another way that I think is most effective in kind of shifting to that maintenance is getting employers on board and having policies within different places of employment that either offer, commuter incentives every day that they sustainably commute. They, get a couple of dollars, and we see a lot of local employers doing that, especially within the downtown. And it seems like those really sustain that lasting behavior change. But just seeing employers kind of create a culture that really supports sustainable transportation, I think that kind of helps instill that into their employees to kind of adopt that for long term.
Well, kudos to you guys for doing this.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for your feedback.
Yeah, thanks, Peter and Catherine. Josh. Josh Slotnick, Commissioner Slotnick, are you muted?
I was muted. It's a modern sin, a modern mistake, modern faux pas. So anyway, Catherine, I was wondering if you could speak to trends you've seen over the last couple of years in terms of changing or mode shift, and what do you expect over the next couple of years? Like what have people been doing, and what are they going to do?
That's a good question. It's hard to predict. I think in the past couple of years, in bigger cities, of course, we've seen the new micro mobility. So people really broadening how they get around, not just using one mode, but some days using a scooter, having bike share available. And then also there has been a rise in carpooling, just with different apps that allow people to find people to carpool with in real time. I think we certainly see that more in bigger cities where there's a lot of congestion and you're more likely to find someone to carpool with, like the day of. So I see a lot shifting to that. E-bikes are certainly growing, and I think going to continue to grow, just for people who have kids, just making that commute much easier, or living further distances, or living up a hill, seeing that as a much more economical option than having to get a vehicle, but being able to use an e-bike. And I think that we'll certainly see a lot more people telecommuting in the next couple of years. I think this has been kind of a big social experiment. A lot of positions that were never considered ones that people could do from their home. We're finding that there are ways to figure that out and to navigate around that. So I think we'll see a lot more people working remotely, and maybe not full time, but just having that option available, even just once or twice a week. And that's something we're hoping to work with employers locally on. If they don't have telework policies in place, using this current situation as a way to kind of encourage them to consider creating those policies for the long term, so that people can work from home when it is appropriate.
Thanks. And we're going to have to move on here pretty soon to our final presentation, but got a couple other hands up. Ben, and then I think Mirta.
Thanks, I'll be quick. I just wanted to speak really quickly to Peter's kind of question and observation about that final kind of going from trying it to maintenance being a difficult piece. And that is that's kind of the step that some of the programs that we, by we, I mean the bicycle pedestrian program and Missoula Motion, we work side by side together on a lot of things. And in the decision to drop some of the events that are kind of creating that that maintenance or that perpetuation of new habits, the thought isn't that those projects don't have value. It's that when we are under kind of scrutinized federal funding and under the government, using government dollars, they might not have the bang for the buck that some of the other projects have, but that there is definitely value to them. And we are working closely with nonprofit partners like Free Cycles, like Pedal Missoula, Adventure Cycling, and other groups to try and pick up the pieces, so to speak, and keep those programs going, even if we're not able to do it. So I just wanted to be clear that even as we do drop some things, it's not because they don't have value. They do have value. It just isn't where we have the time and money to spend right now.
Thanks. And Mirta, you have the final word before we'll move on.
Well, kudos to Missoula in Motion. I think we're a better community because we have Missoula in Motion. Our air quality is better or improved because of that. Same with traffic congestion. So I'm always impressed with how quickly they can innovate and get our community going. Just really quickly wondering how, what the connection or the involvement now of Missoula in Motion is with our public schools. If something like, the former safe routes to school, how is that working in terms of trying to educate our younger population?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's kind of our fifth priority. That is something we don't have the resources to allocate to too much currently. But we do have a contract with Free Cycles specifically to work with our schools. And so they do different events, education events, and help educate students and just kids of all different ages about, using biking for transportation and focusing on the safety. We have had, it's been a really big challenge to get into the school system to work with them. They haven't been very responsive, and we've tried to work through Let's Move Missoula and kind of make that link to active transportation and getting kids moving and healthy. And so we did do a Safe Routes to School program with them a couple of years ago. And it's something we certainly like to get started up again. It's often just an issue of limited resources. And then again, spending a lot of time and energy trying to get into the schools, but them not being very receptive. I think they just have a lot of other priorities and things going on. Another thing we've worked with them recently on is kind of trying to educate parents about not idling in the school zone, which is a policy that they adopted. And we even were able to get signs for each of the schools and provided them. And I think they are only up at like 1 or 2 schools. So we keep reaching out, asking like, can you find your sign and put it up? And it just seems to be an uphill battle just navigating that system. So we're certainly open to suggestions.
Thanks. Well, thanks for all the work that you and your team do, Catherine.
Thanks so much for having me speak.
Ben, it's your chance to demonstrate how to change a diaper and do a presentation at the same time.
Well, we'll see. So far, the bottle. Uh-oh.
How are you?
Hey, bud, what's going on? I scared him. He was busy. Oh, here it comes. You ready?
And I can jump in and do the presentation if you step away. We can pinch hit that one. All right. I'm gonna. Ben, you want me to take this one on? Okay.
Okay, that's a yes from Ben Weiss.
The joys of remote work with childcare duties. Let me just share my screen really quick here and get this going. So we wanted to give and I can run through this pretty quickly, but we wanted to give an update on the neighborhood greenways initiative that we developed way back in 2015 and 2016 as part of the bicycle facilities master plan. And so we've done a lot of work over the last intervening years, in particular in the last couple of months, that I think will be fairly good updates. So can everyone see the presentation and my screen?
Yep.
Great. So kind of just starting with a reminder of what the neighborhood greenways are and how these developed. The idea is that they are low traffic, low speed, and low stress streets that are accessible really for all ages and all abilities. This is a concept that came out of the bicycle facilities master plan, but really we tried to carry forward in things like the pedestrian plan, that we need to design facilities that are safe and comfortable for any person, whether they're, Nathan's age at just under a year, or someone's grandparents or older. The idea behind neighborhood greenways is they prioritize non-motorized travel, and so creating that network throughout the city, and that they really access those critical services like schools, parks, shopping, and employment. And one of the ways that we've started looking at this and transportation in general from an equity standpoint, we did a health impact assessment of a neighborhood greenway network back in, gosh, that might have been even 2014, before we'd even solidified these in the bicycle facilities plan, and really found that they have the opportunity for increased physical activity. They can increase the number of people walking and biking, which will have a number of benefits, both from the physical health side and the air quality. They also have the benefit for non-motorized travelers in general, just by being away from our congested roadways. And so there's a direct air quality or health benefit to those people by being away from particulate matter and exhaust from vehicles. And then preventing injuries to people through decreased conflicts with motor vehicles. So essentially we're creating that separation between motor vehicle travel and our non-motorized users in a way that's really comfortable and accessible. So again, there are a number of key elements to neighborhood greenways. We see these as a really efficient and cost-effective way to provide that non-motorized transportation network throughout Missoula. There are some key improvements that we need to make. They need to connect neighborhoods. So this was really an idea that we want increased connectivity through those neighborhood streets. They need to be direct because people on bike or walking also want to get where they're going as quickly as possible, just like people driving vehicles. And then we need to really focus on safe crossings of our collectors and arterials. So streets like Russell or Broadway or Reserve, you need to have a really good safe crossing for these networks to work to connect people between neighborhoods. We also need wayfinding so people know where to go because they may not be as obvious as the main streets. And then that wayfinding could be signage or shared lane markings, and to also help people who are driving know that they're on a neighborhood greenway and that they should drive slower and be aware of those non-motorized users. And then installing traffic calming. So this is an example from Patty Creek Street down in the south side of town. There are some speed bumps there that have cut throughs for bikes or fire trucks. And so that's one element. We also have a good example at Burton and Broadway, where there's some small, easy improvements like median refuges and some additional signage that gets you across Broadway safely as a cyclist or a pedestrian. And we find that at that location, we get really good compliance with vehicles yielding to cyclists and letting them cross through. So, to develop these greenways, this wasn't just a top down, us sitting in our offices, identifying what this network is. We really went out and had some criteria for identifying, looking at things like destinations, connections, what is the design of the existing roadway? Is it comfortable, enjoyable for people to be on? We had neighborhood volunteers go out and score these routes to rank different streets for potential as a neighborhood greenway. And we had the bicycle ambassadors a couple years ago out evaluating these streets as well to come up with a way that would get us really good quantitative information, and then paired that with the public outreach we did and identified streets that people were already using and were already existing within neighborhoods. So from that, we developed the initial network that came out in the 2016 Bicycle Facilities Master Plan. The idea is that we created a series of projects for each route that would establish those with signs and sharrows, identify the intersection improvements that would be needed to connect those routes, and then identified the needs for traffic calming within the neighborhood. So when you're traveling on that street between major intersections, that it still feels comfortable. And so we have that network identified and laid out in the 2016 plan. It was adopted as a project into the 2016 Long Range Transportation Plan. And in the intervening years, we've been really thinking about ways that we can start to implement this, knowing that they are fairly low cost, but there's some challenges getting low cost projects like that into CIPs or other funding sources, because they're often competing with large projects like South Avenue reconstruction or other real critical transportation needs that we have. So we've been really trying to think creatively about funding to get these projects in place. One is just through the CIP process, so working with the city and thinking about how these projects get moved forward, and really thinking about greenways as a corridor and not individual intersection improvements. So something like a Kent Central Greenway that would get you from the university to CS Porter as being one project and one corridor that have a series of intersection improvements. We're also looking for cost-effective opportunities where we have other projects coming through, whether it's a CIP or road maintenance, and opportunities where we can leverage that work to do the smaller scale work at these intersections or connecting greenways. Other examples are public-private partnerships. So the hospital is a good example. So this illustration is at Broadway and Owen, where we know we have a lot of hospital employees trying to cross there, get to the hospital. There's a real safety concern, both from the city and from hospital staff. So we've put together a project here where we can do it in stages. There's already temporary RFBs that were put out, I think within the last week or two. So those are the rapid flashing beacons. And then the plan is long-term to create more of a full intersection improvement. So there's a way we can be cost effective to get the temporary improvement to address the immediate safety, and then do the further improvements later when we have the funding identified. So again, trying to be creative with these projects, and they really lend themselves to doing a lot of low cost interventions. So we also have an opportunity that came up and allowed us to think about greenways a little bit differently during COVID-19, particularly sort of in the most isolated kind of lockdown portions over the end of March and most of April. That it's a challenge. People were limited in where they could go, but there were also some opportunities to think about our local streets a little bit differently in terms of people need to get out and get physical activity. And we know that biking is a great source of health benefits and for people to get out. We also saw pretty quickly that use of our trail system was going up really quickly. And there were some concerns about the ability for our trails and open space system to accommodate all the people who want to get out and be physically active or just get out of the house safely and be able to maintain that social distance. And so thinking about greenways is a real opportunity to highlight that people could stay within their own neighborhoods, still get out, they could walk. We saw decreased volumes in traffic, so it's a good opportunity for people to feel safe out on the streets, and really highlight these as a neighborhood resource, both for physical activity and to get people to start thinking about transportation within their own neighborhood. So we've done that in a couple of ways. We started with outreach and social media, just trying to get the idea of neighborhood greenways out into the community, that these are resources that you can go outside your door, and that we have greenways in just about every neighborhood in Missoula, and that people can safely maintain social distance and get that physical activity, or think about using them as transportation. And also trying to do some outreach related to travel speeds, and thinking about, for people driving, consider local streets at 25 miles per hour feels really fast when you're outside of a vehicle. So starting that campaign that, 20 miles per hour is maybe a much better speed limit on these local streets.
And Aaron, we've got about 5 minutes left, just to let you know.
Okay, yep, I'm almost wrapped up here. So we also tried to identify some neighborhood loops, so that if people wanted to get out and get physical activity within their neighborhood, it's sort of along the lines of the prescription trails idea, that there are these loops that you could use to get out and within your neighborhood, and really highlighting the Greenway network and trying to get people to get exposed to them. And then, we really want to foster some neighborhood ownership, that this is an opportunity for residents within the neighborhoods to have greenways become a neighborhood resource. So thinking about the signage that we could help put out, these are some examples that other communities are using to highlight neighborhood streets so everyone knows, and you could put these out on a yard sign, or it's really easy, quick deployment. And then thinking more long-term, sort of the next step, doing some quick deployment traffic calming so that we could start to implement these greenways, again, being efficient and opportunistic, looking for opportunities to put up these kinds of quick pop-up traffic calming that also serve as a way for neighborhoods to, again, take ownership, create some, whether there's some artistic elements to this, or really getting neighbors thinking about these streets as a resource for their community, and that they can create some kind of local neighborhood character while we're quickly deploying some of these resources to do traffic calming. So that's kind of the end of where we're at now. Trying to think about how we can get those temporary traffic calming improvements out very quickly, engaging neighborhoods. What we've heard so far is a lot of the people that we have talked to within each neighborhoods, particularly some of our, like Franklin to the Fort, North Side, West Side neighborhoods that don't have as many resources, but they're really excited about this idea and are already starting to commit to try to think about ways that they can promote them and do things within the neighborhood to help us implement this vision. So
Thanks, Aaron.
Yep.
Yeah, and we can certainly carry this over into the next meeting also, if folks want to dig a little deeper into strategies for moving this forward. But any quick comments or questions at this point?
I just want to take a second to chime in and just say that the city is finding ways to implement some of these temporary. We've hemmed and hawed for years over the benefits of temporary versus permanent. With temporary, you can do it quick and be very responsive and nimble, but the downside is you don't have the full ADA improvements, and there might be other things, and you just have to come in and redo it, do it correctly at some point. And so if you're going to do it, might as well do it right. And on the permanent side, it's always really expensive, so we often don't end up getting projects off the ground even. And so now, because of kind of the heightened awareness of greenways and the kind of neighborhood demand for making these streets safer, we've decided that we can go in and we're going to put some temporary traffic circles up. So it might not be painted tires, it might be more like wooden planters and signs and stripes, but we're moving forward on a couple of the routes, and hopefully we'll have more in place within a month or two.
Great. Any other, Peter?
Oh, did I turn myself on? Yes. We don't have to talk about it now at all, but I'm interested in some of the difficult intersections and streets, like 6th between Higgins and whatever, the bridge. I know we've heard complaints of the university community about how fast traffic travels there. The fact that the Hellgate kids have to cross it every time they go to the fields, and the bicyclists who feel like they take their lives in their hands. Is there a chance to talk about some of the more difficult intersections or streets in Missoula and how we can do this kind of green path through them?
Aaron, why don't we put that on next TPCC's agenda, and we can drill down a little deeper into the intersection question and maybe how that relates to the greenway concept?
Yep, I think we can do that.
Okay. Well, folks, we are totally out of time. We actually used our full hour and a half, which doesn't always happen, and great updates today. Any final pressing announcements or closing comments folks need to make before we adjourn? And maybe at the next meeting, I'll try to get this on the agenda. It seems like it's time that I don't want to put words in your mouth, Jordan, but I think we've got some announcements relative to a passenger rail initiative that we've been working on, and we just don't have time to get into the details today, but maybe we can do that in greater depth at an upcoming meeting.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. Good meeting. Be safe and be well, and we will be adjourned.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.